This is Brian, ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 2018's Primal Rage. And this is a pretty impressive movie. It's not as good as it could be, mind you, but it's pretty good. Though, before I begin, it needs to be stated that two types of creature movies are really close to my heart. First off are werewolf movies. The really good ones are few and far between, mainly because to have a good-looking werewolf, you need a great-looking werewolf costume, typically. And that's hard to do. It's expensive to do. Most movies at that point will pretty much shit the bed. And from that point on, unless they're really good directors, it's done. There's not a lot you can do to salvage those movies. Though the Bigfoot genre, Sasquatch, Yeti genre, or I should say subgenre, is actually a really interesting one too. When it's done well, such as movies like 2015's, I think, Exists, The Legend of Boggy Creek, though that movie came out, I believe, in 1974, and I haven't seen it broadcast since, so to be totally honest with you, I'm not even sure I saw that movie. It was so long ago, but I think I did. And Willow Creek, another good Bigfoot movie. Though the thing is, those movies tended to show Bigfoot rather infrequently because, as I said, it's hard to do well. If you don't care about that, if that's no obstacle to you, then it's easy to do, frankly. Just put someone in a furry suit and parade them around a little bit. But if you're trying to do it really well, it's difficult. So, on that level, Primal Rage works really well. The Bigfoot creature is great. And the director, Patrick McGee, came from special effects. So he really created, or I should say helped create, a great looking Bigfoot. It doesn't look like Bigfoot is traditionally depicted, but it's really good looking nonetheless. And this movie does what I like other movies to do more often, which is to say, it takes advantage of its surroundings. The movie takes place in a forest, and there's some beautiful shots of people interacting with the scenery and just moving around it. It looks great. There's so much production value to be derived from using wherever you are really well, and this movie does. There's some really good gore effects in this movie. When I saw this, I was generally shocked by the quality of these effects. Again, the director works in special effects, but to see so many visually interesting gore effects just blew my mind. It works so well. So I don't want to imply that this movie doesn't have problems, because it does. And I think its problems are relatively minor. It's a pretty thrilling movie, though it's not as good as it could be. And probably the biggest of those problems would be that the creature mimics people too much, which is to say, it's a Sasquatch, but it uses bows and arrows and that type of thing, and axes and all sorts of weapons. Now, there's a logic to that, in that the story revolves around Native American legend, which this creature, as depicted, is a part of. So it makes sense from that perspective, but it really kind of doesn't, in the sense that this creature has claws and fangs, is very silent, and is incredibly strong and extremely lethal. So why it needs bows and arrows and axes and all sorts of tools to kill is a little confusing and kind of silly, to be totally honest with you. It reminds me somewhat of the Underworld movies, which had werewolves with guns and knives. You're a werewolf, what are you doing? Be a werewolf. Why are you shooting people with guns? You're a werewolf. It's that kind of stuff, which just irritates me. It's just dumb. And another thing about this movie that's really odd, and actually undermines it, is there's a character who is a I want to say a shaman, but she's female. I don't know if in Native American culture a shaman can be female. It's shaman for a reason, so I don't know. But in any case, she's a healer and she has all kinds of, I want to say powers, but that's not really it. She just has all kinds of knowledge, arcane and ancient knowledge. And the way she looks is like something out of a horror magazine. Fitting for the movie in the sense of it being a horror movie, but not fitting in terms of telling a really interesting story. She looks so wicked and evil. And in fact, she looks like one of the creatures, but she really doesn't because they show the creatures and they look nothing like her. She just looks weird, feels to me just to look weird. She literally looks like a witch you'd see on a typical Halloween, which is, say, hooked nose, very long fingernails, almost like talons, very wrinkled skin. It's almost as if Patrick McGee, being a special effects guy, felt the need to throw special effects and makeup effects anywhere he could. And in this instance, which is the only time you see this type of misstep in the movie, it really kind of pulls you out of it because she looks so absurd. So it's kind of disappointing really, because this movie had ditched the whole Bigfoot with arrows and knives and stuff like that, and got rid of the old witchy woman, or at least I shouldn't say get rid of her, just make her look like a normal person. The movie would have had more of a gravitas, more of a feeling of unease about it. Instead, the minute you see her, and while I can't speak for anyone else, it took me out of the movie. It was so absurdly silly and such an odd choice to make that it confused me. It made me wonder why this was happening. What I didn't mention earlier, though, is the movie follows two tracks. One track involves this man who was just released from prison and his wife who picked him up. And the other track is, well, actually I should say three tracks potentially. One track is the one I just mentioned. Another track is the sheriff, who is Native American. And the third track revolves around the Bigfoot itself. And they come together pretty well. Though, as I said, this movie is not nearly as good as it could be. It starts out with a bang. It works really well to perhaps, I want to say, the first Bigfoot attack, which is where you see that it's kind of like too human in the way it does things. And in fact, for a while I was wondering, was this a person in a costume? Well, it is a person in a costume, but I mean in terms of the movie. I was wondering, was this a person in a costume? Was this a murderous Native American person who decided that white people should suffer for their crimes? That's an interesting angle, but the movie didn't go that way. It literally had these creatures who just wore bark to camouflage themselves and used weapons. And they would have just gotten rid of the used weapons part. This could have been great. I mean, this could have perhaps been the best Bigfoot movie, other than the film that depicted Bigfoot, supposedly, ever made, I think. Though it didn't do those things. That being said, it's still pretty good. It's a great looking movie with excellent cinematography, and it's fascinating on lots of levels. Though, I guess what it could be is the most interesting thing of all. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. And everyone, have a Happy New Year. Oh yes, and I should mention that Primal Rage is currently on Tubi. It's free and it's well worth your time. Peace.